stories tell the tale of some of the worst dark web crimes committed over the last decade. The victims had no idea what they were signing up for. Imagine you're just starting out your modeling career. You want to be in the spotlight, but you don't have all those good connections yet, but you have a good agent, and you seem to be in good hands. Suddenly, he gets you a booking for a photo shooting in Milan. Sounds like the dream, right? Unfortunately, for 20-year-old Chloe Ayling, it was her worst nightmare. This story begins in 2017 in London, UK. Chloe was working for Phil Green's supermodel agency. Green was a lawyer and a part-time DJ. A newspaper painted a not-so-great picture of his business. He runs the sleazy agency from his family home, while a registered office telephone number is simply on divert to a mobile. Although not the top model agent, he had good connection and a few successful clients. Chloe trusted him. In March 2017, Green sent Chloe to a photo shooting in Paris. There, Chloe met Lukasz Herba, a 30-year-old Polish programmer from Oldbury, UK. He had organized the photo shoot, which turned out to be a complete failure. But Chloe and her agent didn't think much of it. He was just bad at business, they thought. Unfortunately, that would be a terrible mistake. Skip to July 2017. Chloe gets a call from Phil Green. Lukasz is going under the alias Andre Lazio, which he'd used in Paris too. He wanted Chloe to come to a photo shoot in Milan. This is what Green writes in his book now.
The required information was given to me by the photographer, including a picture of the studio, Google Map locations, details of surrounding streets, confirmation of makeup artist and stylist. Chloe had also met the photographer before.
Sure. Only the studio didn't exist.
And he was able to admit to my mum on the phone after I didn't turn up from Milan that he called other agencies in Milan and they all told him that the studio doesn't exist. So if it took a basic check like that after I was there, why couldn't he have done that before?
Phil Green sent Chloe to Milan with promises of a good photo shoot. So on July 12th, she packed her bags, kissed her mom goodbye, and flew over to the location they'd given her. When she arrived in front of the studio, no one was there.
It was when I walked into the studio and there was just silence. Normally someone would greet you at the door, close to the door, but I just didn't hear anything. So that's why when I saw the door saying studio on it, I went to open it, but before I had the time to quickly process my thoughts, that is exactly when the masked man put his arm around my neck and my mouth and nose.
While Chloe was simply trying to open the door to the studio, a man came from behind her and pressed hard on her neck and mouth so she couldn't scream for help. Another masked man came from the side and injected Chloe with in her wrist. She was panicking, but soon she was out.
When you saw that syringe, I mean, this happened in seconds. When you saw that syringe in his hand, what was going through your mind?
Absolute panic. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why they were doing it.
Chloe, now passed out, was put inside a black bag in the trunk of a car and drove around for dozens of miles.
So I was like, I'm gonna die, I'm not gonna come out of this alive.
Chloe woke up while she was still in the trunk, handcuffed, folded inside a dark, narrow bag, and her mouth duct-taped shut.
I opened my eyes and I have restriction on my mouth. I didn't know what it was at first. I had hands in my handcuffs and I was trying to feel where I am. I heard the engine, so I knew I was in a moving car.
Chloe tried to shout and get out of the bag, but the radio was playing very loud music inside the car. Chloe kept calling for the driver, louder and louder, until they pulled over.
Then I was still asking questions when they came round.
But they were still masked?
They were still masked at this point, yeah.
But you were able to see something in the back of that car, a suitcase.
Yeah, it was when they put the pullover, I saw through the gap that they'd put an empty suitcase above it. And at that point, I thought that I was going to die because what other reason would they put an empty suitcase about my size on top?
But the men returned to the wheel and drove off. They took Chloe to a remote farmhouse in Viu, near Turin. They dragged her into the house and tied her to a piece of furniture. Finally, they took their masks off. It was Lukasz and Michael Herba, two brothers. Chloe had seen Lukasz in Paris and was finally piecing it together. This had been a long, creepy, premeditated plan. Michael was renting out the farmhouse from a man called Fabrizio. Michael claimed he was an artist looking for an isolated spot to focus on his work.
This is where she slept?
UK.
Handcuffed?
Handcuffed, yes.
Did the neighbours notice anything at all? Did they see them?
I vicini pensavano che fossero una coppia.
They saw them eating, doing the shopping, as if they lived together normally, a couple on holidays.
So, if Chloe was being handcuffed to a wardrobe, how come she was going out with the brothers? Well, here's where it gets truly creepy. Lucas convinced Chloe that he and Michael were part of a nasty, notorious crime gang called the Black Death. Lucas convinced Chloe he was going to sell her as a sex slave at an auction on the dark web.
He said I would be sold to somewhere in the Middle East, and that the men would use the girls for about 3 months, pass them around to all the relatives and friends, and then when they're eventually bored of the girls, and they just feed them to the tigers.
Chloe was terrified and compelled to do everything Lucas told her, for fear she would be killed otherwise. Meanwhile, Lucas sent an email to Phil Green, signed MD, from the Black Death group. He wanted a ransom for Chloe, 300,000 euros, or Chloe would be sold as a sex slave. After speaking to Chloe's terrified mom and explaining the situation, Phil contacted the UK consulate in Milan. This was the quickest way to get the attention of the local police. Soon enough, the Milan police went to check the studio's address and confirmed it was a setup. But although they found a piece of Chloe's clothing inside, they didn't have any other evidence to proceed, such as emails or suspect DNA. The investigation stalled, and it seems like Chloe was on her own. Luckily, she thought the same thing, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. As days progressed, it seemed like Lucas was becoming more friendly towards Chloe, as if he was taking pity on her. Once, he even took her shoe shopping, and CCTV footage shows them holding hands. Chloe was trying to play along and befriend Lucas as quickly as she could.
When you were in the shop, couldn't you have just made a run for it with people around you?
He made me believe that even if I managed to escape, I would still be killed. I had to go about this the right way.
On July 17th, Chloe's 6th day as a prisoner, Lucas took her to the UK consulate in Milan. He demanded Chloe pay him back the money he would have made off of her at the auction, the same 300,000 euros he wanted from Phil Green. He also told Chloe to identify him as a friend, as the consulate would have seen him escorting her. Once on her own, Chloe told the consulate everything. She remained in Italy for 3 long weeks while the police investigated everything. First, they arrested Lucas and Michael. It turns out the whole Black Death story was a fabrication. Lucas wanted to appear more menacing, and Chloe not to try to escape, for fear of the Black Death finding her one way or another.
And even the 3 weeks I was kept in Milan by the police, I still was like living in fear, like I had no security or anything. I was like, there's other people out there. The guy that saved me is in jail, but the bad guys, the Romanians that took me, they're still out there.
There weren't any other bad guys, Romanian mafia or Black Death gang. In fact, it was just 2 psychotic brothers with a very dark fantasy.
And then you find out that this is all in his head. This is that none of this is true.
I know, it was because I believed it so much, and then obviously that was such a reassurance to hear that that wasn't the case, because I was just thinking I've got to do everything he tells me to.
But before going down, Lucas had one more trick up his sleeve. He told the police that he and Chloe had dreamed up this plan together as a publicity stunt. He added that he was in love with Chloe and that the plan was inspired from a movie called By Any Means. The worst part was that people believed this. When Chloe returned to the UK, she was being scrutinized by the media for faking her story for fame and glory. People said that Chloe sharing Lucas's bed or holding hands in the CCTV footage proved she was in on it. Excuse me, what? Anyone who has read about kidnap cases knows that a key survival method is playing along with the kidnapper's fantasy. Fear and the desire to escape can make a person do many things. Some people also noted Chloe's calm and composed way of discussing her nightmarish days, but they didn't see her then.
And I was in Italy for 3 weeks before I actually came home to the UK, so I had what people here didn't witness was me crying almost every day, me being too paranoid to leave my room. Any noises I hear, I would freak out, having nightmares. No one here witnessed that.
Finally, on June 11th, 2018, Lucas Herba was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 16 years and 9 months in prison. Michael was also sentenced to 16 years, but in 2021, his sentence was reduced to 5 years and 8 months on the grounds of Michael only being an accessory. With both brothers in jail, Chloe could finally get some closure, as well as the UK's media trust. However, she will never be able to trust people the same way again. Lucas acted as her savior, rescuing her from a giant organization that he in fact made up. He was her kidnapper, and yet he convinced her he was the good guy. It's a horrible story that Chloe will have to live with forever. This story is about to get as dark as a story can get. It begins with a boy called Peter, who is violated by a priest in Victoria, Australia. He grew up into a man, got married in Melbourne, and had 2 kids. Things seemed alright, except he could never really shake off a bad feeling. He couldn't stand being good. In 2011, Peter Scully mysteriously fled to the Philippines. He was about to be charged with a real estate scam that could cost investors over $2.6 million. Also, he was operating an unlicensed escort service that offered his then Filipina girlfriend as a worker. The Philippines were a place Scully could start fresh, but he wasn't looking for any fresh start. In fact, he liked the Philippines because he felt he could do whatever he wanted. It was then that he truly let his evil unfold. Scully was about to create one of the largest dark web child pornography rings in history, and he would be the one to violate and torture the victims in the videos.
The first case is the slavery, the fact that he's kept 2 young girls in a house and sexually abused them, tied them in dog chains and allegedly made videos of them. That's one case. The second case involves the holding of young victims and sexually abusing them, and then it went to violence against the young victims as well as abuse, and then unfortunately and horrifically ended in the death of one of the victims.
But he wasn't alone in the horror he caused on Mindanao Island. He had recruited 2 Filipino girlfriends, Carme Ann Alvarez and Lizelle Margallo. Both of them were teenagers and suffered abuse. Carmen was a child too, and Lizelle had also been trafficked as a child.
He said to me, "Can we adopt some street kids?" And I said, I don't know, I don't think so. What if my sister could live with us? He said to me, "No, I don't want your sister. I want street kid to help them."
Carmen was slowly getting the gist of what Scully wanted, but she didn't want to believe the reality of it. Half of her ignorant, half of her eager to do what others had once been done to her. Carmen became a trusted accomplice of Scully's.
Then I meet these 2 kids. Then I said to these kids, "You want to come with me?" And then the kids say, "Yes."
Scully had even asked Carmen for kids of a very specific age, 9 and 12. When Carmen brought the 2 girls to Scully's house with the promise of food, Scully had them drink alcohol and perform sexual acts between them. The girls tried to run, so Scully had a plan for them. First, he tied them up in dog chains overnight.
The following day after breakfast, we were asked to dig a grave.
Why did you have to do that? What were you told would happen to you?
That we will be buried in the graves that we are digging.
The girls knew they had nowhere to run. Scully and Carmen would make sure they wouldn't make it out alive. Over the following days, Scully would rape and torture the cousins, all while filming everything. Carmen ensured the girls' silence.
Carmen told me to shut up, and she covered my face with pillows so I won't scream.
5 days into their ordeal, Carmen softened at the sight of the girls in dog chains and freed them. But Rosie and her cousin were only 2 of Scully's many victims, and they were among the oldest. Scully had made a website called No Limits Fun, or NLF. There he would offer pay-per-view video streams of the worst kind. Tragically, he had clients from all over the world.
Or the member of the group will tell him to do, he will do, to the point of, killing the child in the course of the sexual abuse.
And who are those people? Where do they come from?
From UK, Germany, and US.
One of Scully's loyal customers was fellow Australian Matthew Graham, one of the biggest ever purveyors of child pornography. In 2012, Scully posted his worst video yet, called Daisy's Destruction. People paid $10,000 for this evil film, showing 3 girls repeatedly violated and tortured by Scully and his 2 girlfriends. Soon, Matthew Graham bought the video and made it public, hoping to profit from it as well. Finally, the police got a glimpse into the horrifying reality of Scully's enterprise.
A video had surfaced in Europe, and that video involved a white male and Asian females molesting children, very young children, as young as 2 and even younger. That video was called Daisy's Destruction, and there was a series of these videos.
Immediately, police around the world started working on this case. They had to find Scully and his accomplices before they would destroy any more lives. It was a worldwide hunt for Scully. First, the Dutch police isolated the location of the video to the Philippines. Then, at least 8 local children were identified as victims. Then, Australian Federal Police Detective Paul Hopkins stepped in, recognizing Scully's Australian accent and promising to find and arrest him.
He said, "I'm so sorry, it appears to be an Australian, and that's awful." So that's how the case came together. It just came together by everyone doing their little bit. And finally then, as the hunt for him was on.
Just around this time, Carman had freed Rosie and her cousin, finally starting to feel some remorse for her actions. Girls headed straight for the Filipino police and told them everything. Now the local police could collaborate with Paul Hopkins and the AFP. Paul Hopkins tracked Scully to Malay Balay City. While they were on his tail and he kept dodging them, the officers were also going house to house, investigating exactly where the abuse had taken place.
So far identified 15 filming locations, and the NBI have identified 5 houses at least.
The police matched the backgrounds from the videos against the stairs, tiles, and windows in the houses. Then the police searched for the victims in the video. Daisy, who was only 18 months old at the time of the video, Cindy, who was 11, and Liza, who was 12. All 3 girls had been handed over to Scully by their families, fooled that Scully would house, feed, and educate them. Daisy had been miraculously rescued by her family, but the other 2 girls were nowhere to be found. Eventually, Liza was found. She had survived and was back at school. Tragically, Cindy's remains would be found under the tiles of one of Scully's houses of horror.
It's awful. It's just terrible. That's incredibly bad.
After violating and torturing her for days, Scully made Cindy dig her own grave, then strangled her with a rope and threw her in. Everything was filmed and sold on the dark web. On February 20th, 2015, the Australian and Filipino police barged into Scully's home. They had finally found him.
20th of February, 4 years after fleeing Australia and committing unspeakable crimes. This is the moment Scully is caught.
Give me your name.
It's Peter Scully.
What?
It's Peter Scully.
Peter Scully.
We have 6 warrants for your arrest.
Scully didn't resist or deny the claims. Peter Scully was charged on 75 accounts and faced trial alongside 4 men who helped with making the videos. He was given life in prison, just like Carman and Liza. Margaret Acullo, the project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, said that this case was the worst she had ever heard of. Everyone involved in the case said that they still have nightmares when remembering the evil video. Scully's crimes were so severe and so extreme, the prosecutors supported the reintroduction of the death penalty in the Philippines, just for his case. When reporter Tara Brown visited Scully in jail for the 60 Minutes feature, he remains defiant and unwilling to discuss whatever made him feel uncomfortable.
Why would you abuse an 18-month-old child?
Well, for a start, I didn't. And
well, that's not true, is it?
It is true. No, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry. How old was she?
He either mocked Tara, avoided questions, or outright told Tara she should read his memoir when he publishes it. Scully left dozens of children forever struggling to cope with the horror of what they went through.
Do you think you'll ever be able to get over the events there in that house? Do you think you'll ever be happy again and not think about them?
I hope I can forget when I grow up.
This last story takes us to the FBI. One day in 2015, the FBI got a tip about an illegal dark website.
One of the users of a BDM site saw this advertisement and then reported it to law enforcement because he believed that it was illegal and it was wrong.
It was a Malaysian website advertising slaves. The case fell into the hands of the FBI department in Phoenix, Arizona, and one of the undercover detectives working to stop trafficking discovered something strange about the website.
So we started investigating that and found out that it was just fraud. They just wanted money sent to them, and then they would not send any slaves.
The Malaysian website was a scam, a very creepy scam indeed, but this gave the FBI an idea.
Whoever was selling those slaves, their server was based out of Phoenix. So that's how we ended up with the complaint.
What if they were to make a phony slave website as a sort of lure for perverts all over the country?
After we ruled out the fact that this organization in Malaysia was a hoax, was a fraud scheme, we didn't think that the investigation should end there, and the reason why was because we had identified over 100 potential targets in the U.S. who had at least expressed an interest in purchasing and controlling a person permanently against their will.
That's right, over 100 men had tried buying a slave just from this Malaysian website. So the FBI used this domain to create their own fake website.
We had undercover officers pose as kidnapped females, posted photos, but we blacked out their face. We put ads on the same websites that the Malaysian ads were on S&M websites. We posted those with an email address, and when they emailed us interest, we gave them a phone number and had a phone conversation.
What the officers would uncover was beyond creepy. The undercover officer carrying out the phone conversations made it very clear that they were selling non-consenting women. None of the men had any problems with that. In fact, that's exactly what they were looking for.
The entire time of the investigation, every conversation that our undercover had with the subject, he mentioned during that conversation the fact that these females were kidnapped and these females were non-consenting, and that everything that we were doing was illegal.
The first two arrests were Edward Kendall and Edward Stevens from Arizona. They both turned up with thousands of dollars in cash at the given location. The police went over to the Stevens home and found ropes, chains, handcuffs, and any means of keeping someone in prison that you can imagine.
This was their prize, and this was something that they had been aspiring to obtain for a long time and that they had dreamt of for a long time.
Their next arrest was Charles Bunnell, an ex-convict from California. He had a previous conviction for kidnapping and assaulting a prostitute. On the phone with the undercover agent, Bunnell spoke in great detail about his plans with his slave.
He said that his primary use that he would use the woman for was for sex. He intended to have sex with the woman as many times as he could, every day of the week.
Bunnell drove to the location in a stolen car. Inside the car, the police found the creepiest kidnap kit. He had everything from shackles and leather restraints to zip ties and chains. Worst of all, he had brought a drug infamously called devil's breath. This renders the victim completely passive and unable to say no to commands. They're still conscious, but they are in a zombie-like state with no free will. If this wasn't horrible enough, the FBI made an even more terrifying arrest. Stephen Currents from Montana. Currents had made his own sex dungeon after his wife died, and he started abusing alcohol.
He actually had a basement, and in that basement he had it looked like a dungeon.
He had a whole lot of BDSM type objects. You know, he had whips, he had paddles, he had chairs, straps.
Before flying over to Arizona, he asked the undercover cop to measure the wrists and ankles of his chosen victims. The officer gave him some measurements and asked him why he wanted these.
And Mr. Curran said that he intended to fashion U-bolts to their ankles and to their wrists.
Moreover, he explained all his plans over the phone.
Wherever they go in the house, they're going to have a chain, and there's going to be a place in the floor that it locks into so that they're limited on how much distance they can move. It'll fit into a piercing in their body.
He had actually made all the arrangements, with chains set in the floor and extending only to the nearby bathroom. Outrageously enough, Currents even told the undercover officer that he had a plan for when people came over to his place.
The other thing I decided too is that when anybody comes over, I'm going to have the girls upstairs and put away. And then I will put gags on them, and I'll use those cage gags to go on the head so they can't open their mouth and they can drink water. And that's it. I don't want someone getting pissed off at me and calling the cops.
Yeah, like that was the real problem. Someone getting upset at him. The FBI's sting was a big success. Unfortunately, it's also a reminder of the terrible things that are happening on the dark web. Thanks for watching, you guys. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more real horror stories. Until next time, sleep tight.